Blood Meridian is an amoeba. Hello, you probably clicked to find out what amoebas teach us about writing and literature. I promise we'll get to that, but first let me give you a little bit of a background on how I discovered the connection between amoebas and literature. So here's the story. I have recently finished Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, and in case you haven't heard about the book, it's a story about a gang of scalp hunters wandering in the desert. The book is filled with things dying. Dying mules, dying horses, dying people, children, women, men, even hope is dying at times. It is by no means my new favorite book, but I liked it, and as any good book it made me think. And the most fascinating thing it made me think about was, why didn't I hate this book instead? Because there were reasons for me to hate it. First, I'm not a big fan of violence, up to the point of not being able to enjoy some of Tarantino movies, or not having the guts to watch Oldboy, even though I know all of that is good art. Sometimes I just cannot bring myself to enjoy it. Second, and more importantly, the story has little to no plot. It has a bit of character development, but not a whole lot of it either. Overall, there is no clear through line that would propel this story forward. And this is contrary to what you'll learn in most writing classes, in which you'll hear about plot archetypes and conflict points, about rising and falling action, about saving the cat that's hunting a red herring in a dark night, and all the good stuff of that sort. So naturally, I was wondering, how could Blood Meridian work? How could such a novel exist and be successful? And that's where amoebas will come into play. I realized that most novels, especially in commercial fiction, are built like houses of cards, where every card, that is every chapter, every scene, sometimes even every sentence, are built to support the next one. They all build upon each other, they all depend upon each other, and if you remove one, the whole thing falls apart. Such novels are engaging page turners. You see the thing being built and you want to see it completed. And yet, not all of them have to be like that. Some novels are instead amoebas. And here's the fact about amoebas that is key. If an amoeba is cut apart, it instantly forms a new membrane over the cut surfaces. The part containing the nucleus may survive, but the other part cannot digest food and eventually dies. Blood Meridian is an amoeba. Each chapter, each scene is part of the whole, but if you remove it, the whole will probably survive. It is all united around a common core, but almost no parts are indispensable. And like an amoeba, this novel doesn't rush anywhere, it just lives and exists. As a reader, you get to know this organism. You let yourself be submerged and digested by those sticky visceral fluids until you completely lose yourself and get dissolved into primal nutritional components. Okay, this analogy went too far, but I hope you see what I am getting at. Here are some key differences I identified between amoeba-like and House of Cards-like novels. First, the scene level. In the House of Cards novel, for a scene to be good, it has to propel something forward. The plot, the character development, the setting, preferably all at once. In contrast, a good scene in an amoeba-like novel doesn't have to do any of that, as long as it is being a part of the whole, and also as long as it helps the reader experience itself and be a part of the whole with it. When it comes to larger structure, a House of Cards novel will be typically organized around a well-defined skeleton, the purpose of which is to tell a compelling, engaging story. In contrast, the purpose for an amoeba novel doesn't seem to be to tell a story, but just to exist, to live. And instead of being defined by the skeleton, it is defined by a boundary separating what it is from what it is not. And what it is can be anything. It can be a feeling, a theme, atmosphere, anything as long as it holds together and forms a coherent whole. The last difference is what I labeled for myself as guidance and honesty. It is very subjective, but for me, since amoeba novels do not try to really pull the reader along with them all the time, they don't try to make sure that the reader is super engaged and super curious all the time, because of that they somehow feel more real and more honest. These books are almost like a crevice in a door left ajar that lead into a different world, and this other world doesn't care about the reader. In a sense, it doesn't depend on the reader reading about it. Although such books may seem aloof, they get more respect from the reader than those that crave the reader's attention and grab onto it using every available trick. So now let's talk a little bit about amoebas in the wild. Blood Meridian was certainly among the most amoeba-like novels I've ever read, perhaps along with The Man Without Qualities by Robert Meixsell. So those are kind of laboratory specimens, you know, a typical spherical amoeba in vacuum. But as I was thinking about it more, I realized that many other novels actually have amoeba-like elements in them. Lord of the Rings is a very good example of that. Although it has a very typical, very linear, straightforward plot, right? We have the bad guy, we have a ring, and we have a quest to bring the ring to the Mount Doom and destroy it. So this is the quintessential plot archetype. But at the same time, we have a lot of elements in the book that do nothing to propel us along this straightforward continuum. We have songs, we have poetry, we have family trees, we have backstory and whatnot. Did all of us look forward to the next song written in Elven language or maybe a translation thereof? Did all of us enjoy the Tom Bombadil detour? For many of us, perhaps not, especially at first, but it is through those things that the book taught us to respect itself. It showed us that it is something more than just a thing to entertain and, you know, keep us engaged. And I think it is a great lesson for mere mortals like myself, who is not yet an established author. So probably we cannot afford to write something completely amoeba-like like Blood Meridian, because it's hard to break through with a novel like that. It requires a little bit of trust, both on the side of the reader and on the side of the editor and publisher and whatnot. And so it's hard to get into the industry with a work like that, I believe. But even if we write the most typical plot-driven story, we could still learn a little bit from the amoebas. We could still take those elements and introduce them into our story, making them a little bit more authentic and gaining a little bit more of the reader's respect. And it is risky. We may risk boring or confusing or somehow else alienating the reader by doing so. But if this is what your work requires, I believe this is a risk that we must take sometimes. So what do amoebas teach us about literature? They again remind us that in writing there are no rules that cannot be flaunted. They also teach us that a novel can be more than a condom stretched over a familiar shape, where only the surface pattern and the flavor are changing. Well, now it sounds like I hate the idea of a plot archetype. I do not. What I do hate is how tempting it is to fall into it as your default. So let us not let the endangered species of amoeba novels die. When you read, don't be averted by them. When it feels like you're drowning in the story, don't panic. Just let the story carry you wherever it wants, and most likely you will be rewarded. When you write, listen to your story, listen to what it wants to be. It might need a set plot structure, and it might not. And yes, it may be harder to write when there's no map to follow. And it may be harder to find your reader when they're not handheld at every page. But maybe that's how your book is. Would you rather write a masterpiece read by a few, or force your work into a common mold and produce a workmanlike novel read by thousands? It's not an easy question, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that flaunting a lot of rules will make a masterpiece automatically. What I am saying is that following all the rules will almost certainly turn anything into trash. That is all I wanted to say today. Let me know about your favorite amoeba novels in the comments, and please have a great day.